G'day, how you going? Peter here from Tactical Edge. Today we went up to the QPS meeting, 2nd of March, all that sort of hoo-ha. Basically, the thing I'll start on is how good is the Gelblaster community. Basically got behind everything that we were saying, kicked up a massive stink, signed a petition for 10,000, which is like the biggest one that has been seen in Queensland for a while. But everybody's banded together behind basically saying no to any regulatory changes. On the flip side of that, we've encountered a situation where, for once, the government and the QPS service has done the right thing by the community, and they've really thought long and hard about how they're going to actually position the legislative changes. And I think they've actually come up with a pretty decent solution to all the problems. They've kept the politicians happy, they've kept the Gelblaster community happy, nothing really is going to change there. And basically overall have done a pretty good job, and we'd have to say thank you to Inspector David Nixon in particular for being the guy who spearheaded that, I believe. So realistically moving forward, the way we're looking at it is that there isn't going to be too much of a change when it comes to how Gelblasters are imported or how they're sold. There are going to be some restrictive requirements, which in a perfect world we wouldn't have any restrictions whatsoever. However, in this case I think it is probably not a bad idea, simply because it gives us some legislative framework to work off, which is probably going to be a good idea moving forward. And the way they've structured what they're going to put into the legislation under the weapons category is actually more beneficial and offers more protection for Gelblasters than just it's a toy. Because obviously being a toy is a debatable sort of position to take, whereas what they're planning on doing is pretty much replacing that section with is not a weapon. Now, a weapon or a firearm is very easy to define under the Firearms Act. So we've really got a solid foundation there to work with, and it's going to put us in a position where we do have a little bit more protection. So my position at the start was, well, you're going to take toy out, what's going to happen then? We don't know. So we don't know what was going to actually happen. And the problem with what the QPS and the state government was doing was that it wasn't actually explaining any of these issues to us. So we were putting forward questions. They weren't really answering them in the way that needed to be answered, especially that specific of how they're going to change the legislation. And that was presented to us today. So I was actually pretty happy with the outcome. Going back again to the requirements under the restriction is that you are going to have to transport them in a safe way, which we all know is probably a good idea. The second one is storage requirements. Now, and this is at home. From my perspective, that's completely unnecessary. However, because of the way the legislation is written and the way that the restricted item category is laid out, it's a little bit difficult to get away with not storing them correctly at home and all that sort of thing, because everything else in that category has to be. So if it goes into that category, then it does need to abide by the same rules as all the other sort of products that are in that category. So I can sort of understand where they came from by putting that in there, and that makes sense in respect to how they're actually doing that. So I suppose something that we can live with, and in a situation where, you know, the police do come into your house and they notice that your Gelblasters aren't locked away, I don't think there'll be any sort of prosecutions made by that. I think they'll probably just tell you to put them away properly. It's very unlikely there will be any prosecutions there. Now, the third one is that they're going to require some sort of reasonable excuse, and that term is so broad that it is really anything can be used as a reasonable excuse, and anything that is unreasonable is not an excuse. So I know that's a weird way to say things, but realistically, if you're the reason for buying a Gelblaster is to go and rob the 7-Eleven, then that's not a reasonable excuse. If your excuse for buying a Gelblaster is to go to a field like Donnybrook or Gelsoft Australia or Gorilla Blasters or something like that, then that is a reasonable excuse, absolutely. To have them at home to tinker with or whatever will be a reasonable excuse. Because you want to own a toy and you collect them, that is a reasonable excuse. So all these things can be used because they are reasonable to own a Gelblaster. Now, I'm sure this is going to attract a lot of different questions and different comments. And look, as part of our new sort of awareness campaign that we're doing at Tactical Edge, we're going to try and start addressing some of these issues as we go forward. And I've spoken to Gilly, and we're going to try and at least catch up once a week for a video like this where we sort of go through any questions that are coming out. And obviously this is going to probably erupt on social media into something that, you know, what about this, what about that, all these different questions, and it's going to be really hard to contain that and to answer all those questions. So look, I mean, I think in the end the associations will do their best to address all of them, but I'm just sort of taking it from my point of view. Now, I did have my lawyer there today as well, who's an extremely expensive bloke to sit with, and we had a really good discussion afterwards about what the impact of this would be. And you know, our lawyer is actually considered one of the best in the country, and his sort of take on it was pretty similar to what I've just done in this, what I've just said in this video. So look, I mean, I've trusted him the whole time. He's never steered me wrong so far, and he's pretty happy with the legislative changes that won't affect us much in the future. So we're really realistically just in a position where, although we don't want any regulations on these things, if they're in this case, it's sort of a bit of give and take where we're going to have an advantage as well as a slight disadvantage, which most of the community and most of the people who are responsible do anyway. So I just think this is probably the best compromise, and it's not going to affect us that much. And in fact, it probably protects us a little bit more than what it did before. So as I said again, I'm pretty happy with the changes. Now, again, please join our association, because that is going to be something that we're going to be putting forward pretty soon, and you're going to have something along those lines, and that's Gelblaster Association of Australia, and we're going to link that below in the video. But yeah, basically we're going to continue to fight to make sure that these things are kept in a position where the public can access them very easily. And we're going to also use that Gelblaster Association of Australia platform to now launch into campaigns in other states and to try and, you know, loosen the laws up a little bit down there, or in the other states, sorry, and just make things a little bit easier Australia-wide. At the end of the day, what we want is interstate competition, a flourishing Gelblaster industry, and, you know, these things to be, you know, widely accepted by the community. So thank you very much for listening, and if you do have any questions, pop them in the comments below. Don't forget to smash that subscribe now button as well. Thanks a lot. Cheers guys.